morning sun in Houston burned down steadily, casting long, shimmering waves across the cracked pavement outside the downtown bus terminal. The air was thick with heat and the restless energy of a city in motion. Students zipped by on scooters, office workers chatted on their phones, tourists fumbled with their maps, all caught in their own worlds. Amid the bustling crowd, there was one man who seemed invisible to most, a figure quietly seated on a worn bench near Gate 5. Zeke Thompson, age 84, sat with a posture weighed down by years, his frame draped in a coat too heavy for spring, but worn like armor against a world that had grown indifferent. The faded Marine Corps cap on his head bore the marks of time and countless touches, its letters nearly rubbed away, but still proud. Beside him, a battered duffel bag rested on the ground, patched and frayed, carrying not just belongings but memories that refused to fade. As teens passed, their laughter broke the steady hum of the terminal. "Look at Grandpa G.I. Joe," one sneered, mocking the quiet veteran. Zeke didn't flinch. He had heard worse in far darker places. Nearby, Chase Lindell, a security guard with a sharp gaze and a quick temper, watched him with thinly veiled contempt. Chase stepped forward, voice loud and firm. "You can't sleep here, old man. Move it or I'll call someone to move you." Zeke's eyes lifted slowly, steady but tired. "Just waiting for the 5 to the north line," he said, his voice dry yet unwavering. Chase scoffed. "You smell like you've been waiting since 1965. You sure you're even going anywhere?" The world around them carried on, but in that moment something shifted. Talia Wynn, a university sophomore clutching her notebook tightly, paused mid-step. She had just finished a class on war journalism, and something about the stillness in Zeke's silence made her stop and look again. The Marine insignia on his cap caught the sunlight for a fleeting moment, a glint of honor hidden beneath shadows. When Chase's arm cast a shadow over it, she stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, is there a problem?" Talia asked, voice gentle but firm. Chase rolled his eyes. "Just cleaning up the sidewalk," he replied, dismissing her and the man with practiced irritation. Zeke said nothing more. His gaze lowered as if waiting for a moment that had not yet come. The bus scheduled for Gate 5 was still 2 hours away, but a story far bigger than the wait time had already begun to unfold. In the midst of a crowd that often turned away, one woman saw a soldier's quiet dignity, a man who bore the weight of unseen battles. And as the heat hung heavy in the Houston air, Ezekiel Thompson sat on that bench, invisible yet unbroken, waiting for the world to finally notice. As the sun began to dip lower and the first shadows stretched across the terminal floor, the quiet vigil of the man in the tattered hat was far from over. Ezekiel Thompson's quiet endurance from the bus terminal carried over into the sterile halls of the Houston Veterans Affairs Office the very next morning. The building stood tall in Midtown, its double glass doors sliding open with a hollow whoosh that echoed like the silence Ezekiel felt inside. As he entered, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead cast a cold glow over rows of plastic chairs, all empty, but for a few restless souls waiting their turn. Each step Ezekiel took was slow and deliberate, the rhythm of his cane tapping softly against the linoleum floor. Tap, drag, tap, a somber beat marking his passage through a place meant to honor sacrifice, but too often filled with bureaucratic coldness. At the front counter sat Lauren Pierce, her blonde curls tucked neatly behind ears, red nails tapping out an impatient rhythm on the keyboard. Her eyes never lifted as she typed absorbed in paperwork that seemed more important than the man before her. Ma'am, I was told to come here for a replacement copy of my DD-214. Ezekiel said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years. They said it's the only way I can apply for housing. Lauren sighed a long breath that seemed to carry annoyance rather than empathy. She finally glanced up, her expression a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled disdain. Sir, she began, slowly elongating the word like a rebuke. Do you have an appointment? No, but the man I spoke with on the phone said I could come in as a walk-in as long as I have my ID. Lauren picked up Ezekiel's worn veteran ID card, turning it over like it was a worthless scrap. This thing's barely legible. It's old. Like me, Ezekiel replied quietly. Lauren chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Rising from her seat, she motioned to a passing security guard. Mr. Thompson, we've had issues with people pretending to be veterans. We can't have folks loitering. Ezekiel blinked, the word loitering hanging heavy in the air. I fought for this, he said, voice low but unwavering. Sure you did, Lauren replied, her tone sharp. But until you shower and bring proper documentation, you'll have to leave. Behind Ezekiel, the lobby doors swung open, and Talia Wynn stepped inside, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder. She froze, eyes wide, as she recognized the old man at the counter. The same quiet figure from the bus terminal, shoulders slightly stooped, not just from age, but from the weight of humiliation. She stepped forward cautiously, careful not to cause a scene. Excuse me, is there a problem? Talia asked. Lauren's smile thinned, replaced by a forced politeness. This gentleman is just confused. Happens a lot. Talia shook her head. He's not confused. He's trying to get his service record. Lauren's eyes narrowed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. And you're someone who recognizes dignity when you see it. Before Talia could answer, Lauren waved a hand dismissively. Security, please escort him out. Ezekiel said nothing. He gathered his duffel bag, gripping his cane, and turned slowly toward the exit. The double doors opened for him once more, and Talia fell into step beside him. Sir, may I walk with you? He nodded, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that day, a flicker of gratitude in the tired gaze. You don't have to, he said softly. I know, Talia replied, but maybe I should. Outside, two office workers glanced over and sneered. There goes another confused old vet, one muttered. But for Talia, every step Ezekiel took was a quiet declaration. I am still here, I remember, and my story is not over. As they disappeared down the sidewalk, the hum of the city continued, indifferent but unaware that a voice long silenced was beginning to be heard. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Ezekiel found his way to an old church, its once vibrant walls now faded and cracked. But for him, it was sanctuary, a place where memories lived and loyalty endured. Ezekiel Thompson's footsteps echoed softly through the abandoned church in Houston's Fifth Ward, a place long forgotten by the world but sacred to him. The once vibrant stained glass windows were clouded with dust and grime, casting muted colors across cracked pews and peeling paint. The heavy wooden doors groaned as he pushed them open, a sound swallowed quickly by the thick silence inside. He moved carefully, his cane tapping a slow rhythm on the worn floor, tap, drag tap, until he reached the altar, where he settled onto a weathered bench. With deliberate hands, he reached into his battered duffel bag and pulled out a small dented tin box wrapped in green military tape. Opening it was like opening a wound, fragile yet unyielding. Inside lay fragments of a past life, a bronze star dulled by age, a blood-stained letter addressed to Mrs. Reggie Jones, a dog tag fused to a jagged piece of steel. Beneath them, a black and white photograph of two young Marines grinning in the dense jungle, their arms slung over each other's shoulders, stared back at him with the innocence of youth and the weight of loss. Reggie Ezekiel whispered, voice trembling as his eyes closed. Memories flooded back the humid jungle air of Vietnam in 1965, the oppressive heat, the tense silence before the ambush. He and Reggie had moved like ghosts, faces streaked with camouflage, eyes sharp and hearts steady. Then the moment that changed everything, the sickening click beneath Reggie's boot. Ezekiel had seen the acceptance in his friend's eyes, heard his calm words, "Back up. Tell Mama I wasn't scared." The blast tore through the world, shrapnel slicing Ezekiel's arm and burying him beneath soil and bone. He clawed his way out with broken hands, the scent of burnt cloth and gunpowder, lingering as Reggie became nothing but fragments, a part of a boot, half a dog tag ashes. Opening his eyes, Ezekiel traced silent tears down his weathered cheeks. "I carried you home," he murmured, touching the fused dog tag gently. The church bell above had long ceased to ring, the pews cracked, and the cross fallen from its place. But here in this forgotten sanctuary, Ezekiel lit a candle, his only ritual. The flickering flame cast dancing shadows across metals and memories, a testament not to faith, but to loyalty and grief. It was a dance of a soldier's heart, scarred yet steadfast, a silent homage to brotherhood and sacrifice. Outside, the world rushed on, unaware of the quiet man who bore its weight within these shattered walls. And inside, Ezekiel Thompson found a measure of peace in memory, in loss, and in the unbreakable bond that no time or distance could sever. As the light faded beyond the stained glass, Ezekiel remained seated, the candle's flame steady against the gathering dusk, holding the past close as the future waited silently outside. Ezekiel Thompson's fragile peace was shattered one late afternoon at Vernon's Market, a small corner store in East Houston, where the hum of neon lights mixed with the low static of an old gospel radio. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of bread and the quiet urgency of everyday life, a mother counting pennies for milk, a teenager arguing over potato chip prices, and Ezekiel standing quietly in aisle 3. He held a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs in his trembling hands, his fingers folding a worn $10 bill, creased and softened from use. When he placed the bill on the counter, the young cashier, Derek, barely glanced at it before raising it to the light with a smirk. "This yours?" Derek asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Zeke nodded once. "Yes, sir." Derek curled his lip in disdain. "Looks fake. Paper's too soft. It's old, but it's real." Ezekiel replied softly, the weight of years in his voice. Derek shrugged off the answer. "We've had scams all week, folks passing off garbage money." Before Ezekiel could respond, Derek shouted toward the door. "Hey, Chase, we got another one." From outside, Chase Lindell stepped in, his grin, wide and smug. "Oh, look, the bus bench philosopher." Zeke stood his ground cane in hand. "I just want my groceries." Chase laughed harshly. "You want jail, old man. Passing fake cash is a crime." Chase grabbed Ezekiel's arm, not roughly, but enough to send a message. Ezekiel winced more from shame than pain. "Son, I fought for this country," Ezekiel said quietly. "Yeah, and you fight for bath time too," Chase sneered. "You smell like mildew and pity." Heads turned. A small crowd gathered, some laughing, others staring in stunned silence. Zeke tried to pull away. Let me go. Not until the cops check this out, Chase growled, shoving him against the counter. The loaf of bread fell to the floor. The eggs cracked open. Ezekiel crumpled, slightly bowed, not from force, but from humiliation. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Get your hands off him! It was Talia Wynn standing near the chip-rack phone in hand recording. Chase turned sharply. Mind your business. It became mine when you threw an 84-year-old veteran against the counter over $10, Talia said steadily. This man is a fraud, Chase spat. Then let's find out in court, Talia challenged snapping photos. You just laid hands on a senior citizen on camera, she continued. Ezekiel looked at her, lips parted, but no words came. No one had stood for him in years. Minutes later, the police arrived. The crowd scattered. Derek shrugged as if none of it mattered. Chase told the officers his version: aggressive, possibly a fraud, fake cash. Ezekiel said nothing, his voice soft as he murmured, That bill was from my last disability check. Used to buy bread for Reggie's mama. The officers hesitated, uncertain, but protocol prevailed. As Ezekiel was led outside, Talia followed, still filming. This isn't justice, she said quietly. It's a performance. Under flashing lights and whispered slurs, Ezekiel Thompson, Marine sniper survivor, was put on trial without a judge, jury, or dignity. But the real trial was just beginning. As the sun dipped lower beyond the store's neon glow, Ezekiel's resolve hardened. Somewhere beyond the chaos lay a reckoning waiting to be faced. The courtroom was quiet but tense the next Monday morning in Harris County Municipal Courtroom 3B. The smell of polished wood mingled with the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Cheap wooden benches creaked as a small crowd shuffled in, a mix of locals here for minor infractions and a few curious observers drawn by Ezekiel Thompson's case. Ezekiel sat at the defense table, his hands folded neatly in his lap, silver hair contrasting sharply with the dull beige of the court-issued chair. His battered duffel bag sagged beside him like a loyal companion, carrying the weight of his story. He hadn't spoken since arriving, not when the bailiff asked his name, nor when security officers whispered. The courtroom's muted murmurs hinted at skepticism, another old man caught in trouble, another supposed fraud. The prosecutor, Audrey Monroe, mid-40s and efficient, shuffled her papers with a practiced air. Your Honor, this case involves Mr. Ezekiel Thompson, detained for attempting to pass a counterfeit bill at Vernon's Market. He refused to produce valid identification and allegedly became hostile when confronted. Judge Helena Cross, stern with icy eyes and a silver bob haircut, adjusted her glasses. Has the bill been tested? Yes, Your Honor, the bill is authentic but worn, Audrey replied crisply. The issue lies with Mr. Thompson's behavior and refusal to cooperate. From the gallery, Talia Wynn scribbled notes, furiously whispering under her breath. Refusal. That's not right, the first witness. Derek the cashier smirked as he took the stand. He was acting weird, muttering about Vietnam and dog tags. Honestly, I thought he was high. Chase Lindell swaggered to the stand next, sneering. He claimed he was a Marine sniper. I mean, come on. Does he look like a sniper to you? Laughter rippled through the room, even the judge cracked a half smile. Then Ezekiel finally lifted his eyes, voice soft but steady. I was a sniper. 1st Marine Scout Sniper Division, 1965 Kangim Province. A hush fell. Ezekiel bent slowly, opened his duffel bag. The courtroom leaned in. He pulled out a worn velvet pouch containing a bronze star, a purple heart, and a jagged piece of steel fused to a dog tag. This, he said, holding up the fused metal, was Reggie, my spotter. The man who stepped on a mine to save me. Gasps rippled through the room. Even Judge Cross leaned forward, eyes wide. I carried him home, Ezekiel continued quietly, even if only in pieces. Silence, the kind that stilled breath and hearts. Before the judge could speak, the courtroom doors opened with purpose. General Malcolm Raines, retired and decorated, walked steadily to Ezekiel's side. His dark blue suit bore the Marine Corps emblem, his presence commanding silence. Staff Sergeant Thompson, the general, said with crisp precision, "You saved my life." The room erupted in stunned whispers and shifting seats. The judge's stern facade faltered. Audrey Monroe stammered, "With all due respect, General, none of this was in the case files." The mission was classified, General Raines cut in sharply. For 40 years, Ezekiel's name was buried in red tape, his service erased from public record. He turned to Chase Lindell, whose smugness had vanished. "You laid your hands on a man whose courage built the walls you hide behind." Talia stood from the gallery, voice trembling but clear. "I knew something didn't add up. I saw him not just a vet, but a chapter we never learned." Judge Cross finally spoke softly. "Mr. Thompson, why didn't you say who you were?" Ezekiel met her gaze, tired but resolute. "Because it shouldn't matter." Those 4 words silenced the room, the noise in heads, the prejudice in hearts. "It shouldn't matter what I wore, where I slept, or if my cap was clean," Ezekiel said. "It shouldn't take a general walking in for folks to treat an old black man with dignity." No one argued. The judge nodded slowly, then said, "Remove all charges from Mr. Thompson's record." Effective immediately, gasps turned to applause, not from everyone, but from enough. Chase Lindell sat frozen, stripped of authority, as easily as he had once assumed it. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, phones flashing, microphones raised. News would spread like wildfire. But inside room 3B, something deeper had shifted. A truth long buried was finally breathing air. A silence endured for decades had finally cracked. And the man once dismissed as a nuisance had reminded a system what respect truly looks like, not through shouting, but by surviving. As the courtroom settled into a heavy, reverent stillness, Ezekiel stood quietly, his Marine cap pressed to his chest, the weight of history and honor settling on his shoulders like a new armor. The morning light spilled softly through the freshly clean, stained glass windows of St. Mary's Chapel in Houston's Fifth Ward. Once long abandoned, its doors had been closed for nearly 20 years, its pews warped by time, and its bells silent for decades. But today was different. Today the chapel waited, filled with a reverence born of remembrance and renewal. Outside, a crowd gathered in quiet anticipation. Veterans stood tall in their dress. Blues families held small American flags, and children in their Sunday best whispered among themselves. News vans lined the street, cameras poised to capture a moment that was more than ceremony. It was resurrection. Ezekiel Thompson approached slowly, cane in one hand, the dog tag of his fallen friend Reggie hanging proudly around his neck. His worn coat still hugged his frame, but this time it seemed less like a shroud and more like armor forged by years of struggle and survival. General Malcolm Raines met him at the chapel steps and offered a crisp, respectful salute. Ezekiel returned it steadily, pride and peace mingling in his steady gaze. Talia Wynn stepped forward, handing Ezekiel the bell rope. For all those who never got to come home, she whispered. Ezekiel nodded, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. He pulled the rope and the bell rang out, a clear, sonorous call that echoed down the block, over rooftops and through open windows. It rang not just for honor, but for recognition, for every forgotten name, for every silent soldier who carried the war home in their hearts. As the crowd bowed their heads, Ezekiel looked upward toward the bell tower, voice soft but certain. I told you I'd ring it for you, Reggie. For the first time in years, the sound of that promise filled the sky. The chapel was no longer just a husk of wood and stone. It was a sanctuary of memory and hope. A resurrection not just of a man, but of a community's commitment to remember and to honor. And as sunlight streamed through the colored glass, the world stood still to listen and to remember. As the last echoes of the bell faded into the quiet morning, Ezekiel stood surrounded by those who had once ignored him, now united in respect and gratitude, a legacy forged in silence, now shining in the light.